I first heard your story decades ago. I told you last night we went out to dinner. I've seen pretty much. Like, what do you think when you go over the Bob Lazar? Every interview you've ever given, I've followed the story incredibly closely. But for people who don't know the story, let's give them.
Imagine if everything you thought you knew about our place in the universe was wrong. What if I told you that for over 30 years, one man has been sitting on the most explosive secret in human history? A secret so dangerous that the government allegedly erased his entire existence just to keep him quiet. Today, we're diving deep into the mind-bending story of Bob Lazar and why his controversial claims are still shaking the very foundations of science and government secrecy. You're about to discover why millions of people around the world believe this one man holds the key to understanding alien technology that could change everything we know about physics, space travel, and our future as a species. But here's the twist that nobody talks about. The more you dig into Bob Lazar's story, the more questions arise. Is he the greatest whistleblower in human history, or something else entirely? Let me take you back to 1989. Picture this. A young physicist named Bob Lazar walks into a Las Vegas television station and drops the most shocking bombshell imaginable. He looks straight into the camera and tells the world that he worked at a secret government facility called S4, located about 15 miles south of the infamous Area 51. But he wasn't just pushing papers or running tests on regular aircraft. No. According to Lazar, he was part of a team trying to reverse engineer flying saucers from another world. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie. But here's what made Bob Lazar different from every other UFO storyteller out there. He didn't just say he saw something weird in the sky. He claimed he got his hands dirty working on the actual technology. He described in incredible detail how these craft operated, what they were made of, and most importantly, what powered them. According to Lazar, these weren't just any ordinary flying machines. These were vehicles that could bend space and time itself. He described seeing 9 different extraterrestrial craft, each with their own unique design and capabilities. But the one that really caught his attention was shaped like a classic flying saucer, about 35 feet in diameter. He said it was made of materials unlike anything found on Earth, and it moved in ways that seemed to defy every law of physics we thought we understood. But here's where things get really interesting. Lazar didn't just describe what these craft looked like. He explained exactly how they worked, down to the smallest detail. He talked about something called Element 115, a super heavy element that didn't officially exist in 1989. According to his story, this mysterious element was a key to everything. When Element 115 was bombarded with protons, it would allegedly create Element 116, which would then immediately decay and release antimatter. Now, you might be wondering why this matters. Well, antimatter is like the holy grail of energy production. When matter and antimatter collide, they completely destroy each other and release pure energy. We're talking about the most powerful energy source theoretically possible in the universe. But here's the kicker. Lazar claimed that this wasn't just used for propulsion. The energy from this process could somehow manipulate gravity itself. Think about that for a moment. If you could control gravity, you wouldn't need massive rockets burning tons of fuel to escape Earth's atmosphere. You wouldn't need wings to fly through the air. You could literally create your own gravitational field and surf through space like riding a wave. The craft could accelerate instantly without crushing the occupants inside, because everything would be moving together within the same gravitational bubble. Lazar described watching these craft in action during test flights. He said they would hover silently, then suddenly shoot across the sky at impossible speeds, making sharp turns that would normally tear any conventional aircraft apart. The movements were so smooth and effortless that it looked like the craft were swimming through the air rather than fighting against it. But the government allegedly didn't want Lazar working on these projects forever. According to his story, he was brought in as part of a small team to figure out how the alien technology worked, so they could potentially build their own versions. However, Lazar claims he grew frustrated with the secrecy and the lack of progress. He felt that this technology could revolutionize human civilization, providing unlimited clean energy and opening up the stars for exploration. This is where the story takes a dramatic turn. Lazar says he decided to blow the whistle because he believed the public had a right to know about this incredible discovery. But the moment he went public, everything in his life started falling apart. He claims that government agents began harassing him, following him, and even breaking into his home. Most mysteriously, all records of his education and employment seemed to vanish into thin air. Here's what makes this particularly eerie. Lazar claimed he had degrees from prestigious institutions like MIT and Caltech. He said he had worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory, one of the most secure research facilities in the country. But when investigators tried to verify these claims, they hit a brick wall. No records could be found of Lazar attending these schools or working at these facilities. It was as if his entire professional history had been erased. Now, this is where the story splits into two very different paths, and this is something we need to talk about honestly. Lazar's supporters argue that this missing documentation proves the government cover-up. They say that erasing someone's background would be exactly what you'd expect if the authorities wanted to discredit a whistleblower. After all, if you can't attack the message, you attack the messenger's credibility. But critics point out some serious problems with Lazar's story. They argue that the missing records aren't evidence of a cover-up, but rather proof that Lazar never had credentials he claimed in the first place. Investigators have found inconsistencies in his story and question whether he ever had the scientific background necessary to work on such advanced technology. Some have even suggested that Lazar might have learned about Element 115 and other scientific concepts from published research rather than from working on alien spacecraft. Here's what's particularly fascinating about the Element 115 controversy. When Lazar first made his claims in 1989, Element 115 didn't officially exist. The scientific community had never successfully created or observed this super-heavy element. Lazar's supporters saw this as evidence that he must have had inside knowledge, because how else would he know about an element that hadn't been discovered yet? But then in 2003, Russian scientists actually succeeded in creating Element 115 in their laboratory. They named it Moscovium, and it was officially added to the periodic table in 2016. Suddenly, Lazar's predictions seemed to have come true. He had described an element that didn't officially exist, and then science caught up with his claims. However, here's the catch that critics are quick to point out. The element 115 that scientists created is nothing like what Lazar described. The laboratory-created version is extremely unstable, lasting only fractions of a second before decaying into other elements. It certainly doesn't have the properties needed to power anti-gravity engines or create antimatter reactions. Scientists say that Lazar's version of Element 115 will require an isotope that's stable enough to use as fuel, but current physics suggests that such a stable version is impossible to create or obtain. This brings us to one of the most important questions in the entire Bob Lazar saga. Even if we can't verify all of his claims, why has the story had such a lasting impact? Why do millions of people around the world still find his account compelling more than 30 years later? Part of the answer lies in the sheer detail and consistency of his story. When Lazar describes the alien technology, he doesn't just wave his hands and say it works by magic. He provides specific technical explanations about gravity amplifiers, antimatter reactors, and how the craft propulsion system operates. He talks about the materials used in construction, the layout of facilities where he allegedly worked, and even mundane details about security procedures and daily routines. Moreover, Lazar's description of how these craft move matches what many other witnesses have reported seeing in UFO encounters. The silent hovering, the instant acceleration, the sharp turns that seem to ignore inertia. These characteristics show up again and again in UFO reports from around the world. Either Lazar somehow knew about these other sightings and crafted a story to match them, or he was describing the same phenomena that others have observed. There's also the timing to consider. Lazar went public with his story in 1989, years before the internet made it easy to research and coordinate elaborate hoaxes. He was putting himself at considerable personal and professional risk by making these claims. If he was lying, what did he have to gain? He didn't become wealthy from his story. In fact, his life became much more complicated and difficult after going public. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the Bob Lazar phenomenon is how it fits into the larger picture of government secrecy around UFOs. For decades, official policy was to deny, debunk, and dismiss any reports of unidentified aerial phenomena. Military pilots who reported strange, Encounters were often ridiculed or had their careers damaged. The entire subject was treated as a joke, something only believed by conspiracy theorists and science fiction fans. However, in recent years, that official stance has changed dramatically. The Pentagon has admitted that military personnel have encountered objects that display flight characteristics beyond current human technology. They released videos showing craft that seem to move in ways similar to what Lazar described decades ago. High-ranking government officials and military personnel are now openly discussing the possibility that these objects might represent non-human intelligence. This shift in official acknowledgement has given new life to Bob Lazar's claims. People are asking, if the government was lying about UFOs for all these years, what else might they have been hiding? If military encounters with anomalous craft are real, then maybe Lazar's story about reverse engineering programs isn't as far-fetched as it once seemed. There's also the question of why Area 51 became such a legendary location in popular culture. Before Bob Lazar's revelations, most people had never heard of this remote Nevada facility. But his detailed descriptions of the base, the security measures, and the secret projects allegedly conducted there helped cement Area 51's reputation as the center of government UFO research. Whether or not his specific claims are true, there's no doubt that real classified aircraft development has taken place at Area 51 for decades. The facility has been home to some of the most advanced and secretive military projects in American history. The U-2 spy plane, the State Route 71 Blackbird, and the F-117 stealth fighter were all developed and tested there. These aircraft incorporated technologies that seemed almost alien when they first appeared. Pilots and observers who caught glimpses of these classified planes during testing may have genuinely believed they were seeing extraterrestrial craft. This raises an important possibility that doesn't get discussed enough in debates about Bob Lazar. What if he was telling the truth about working on advanced aircraft at a secret facility, but misunderstood or misinterpreted what he was actually seeing? What if the alien technology was actually highly classified human technology that was so far ahead of publicly known science that it seemed impossible? During the Cold War, both the United States and Soviet Union were pouring enormous resources into developing revolutionary aircraft and propulsion systems. Some of these projects explored concepts that sound like science fiction: nuclear-powered aircraft, electromagnetic propulsion, and even attempts to manipulate gravity. Most of these programs were failures or dead ends, but they did produce some remarkable prototypes and test vehicles. It's possible that Lazar encountered some of these experimental programs and, lacking the full context or security clearance to understand what he was really seeing, interpreted advanced human technology as extraterrestrial. This would explain both the sophisticated nature of what he described and the government's extreme reaction to his revelations. Military authorities would be just as concerned about protecting cutting-edge weapons research as they would about hiding alien contact. But this interpretation still leaves many questions unanswered. If Lazar was working on classified human technology, why can't investigators find any record of his employment or education? Why would the government allow someone without proper credentials to work on their most sensitive projects? And why do his descriptions of the technology's capabilities seem to exceed even our current understanding of physics? These questions bring us to another crucial aspect of the Bob Lazar story that often gets overlooked: the role of physical evidence. Throughout his decades in the public eye, Lazar has claimed to possess actual samples of element 115 that were allegedly used in the alien craft. He says he secretly took these samples when he left the program, and that he's had them tested by independent laboratories. However, no verified samples of stable element 115 have ever been independently confirmed or made available for public scientific analysis. Critics argue that if Lazar really had such evidence, it would revolutionize our understanding of physics and chemistry. The scientific community would be clamoring to study these samples, and their existence would be impossible to hide or suppress. Lazar's supporters counter that any scientist who tried to study such materials would face the same harassment and suppression that Lazar himself experienced. They argue that the scientific establishment is either unwilling or unable to investigate evidence that challenges fundamental assumptions about physics and the possibility of extraterrestrial technology. This brings us to one of the most frustrating aspects of the entire Bob Lazar phenomenon. After more than 30 years, we're still left with the same basic question: is he telling the truth or isn't he? Despite countless investigations, documentaries, interviews, and debates, there's still no definitive proof either way. What we do know is that Bob Lazar's story has had an enormous impact on popular culture and public perception of UFOs. His detailed descriptions of alien technology have influenced countless science fiction stories, movies, and television shows. His claims about government cover-ups have inspired a generation of researchers and investigators who continue to push for disclosure of classified information about UFOs. More importantly, Lazar's story has contributed to a broader public demand for transparency about government knowledge of unidentified aerial phenomena. The recent Pentagon acknowledgments in congressional hearings about UFOs can be traced back, at least in part, to the groundwork laid by whistleblowers like Bob Lazar, who were willing to risk their reputations and careers to bring these issues into public discussion, whether or not his specific claims are accurate. Lazar deserves credit for forcing a conversation that the establishment would have preferred to avoid. He helped break the taboo around serious discussion of UFOs and the possibility of non-human intelligence. He showed that it was possible to approach these topics with scientific methodology rather than just speculation and belief. The Bob Lazar story also highlights the broader challenges we face when trying to evaluate extraordinary claims. In our age of information overload and competing narratives, how do we separate truth from fiction? How do we evaluate evidence when the most credible sources might have reasons to hide or distort the truth? How do we maintain healthy skepticism while remaining open to possibilities that challenge our current understanding? These are questions that extend far beyond UFOs and alien technology. They touch on fundamental issues about how we acquire knowledge, how we evaluate sources, and how we navigate a world where official statements can't always be trusted. The Bob Lazar phenomenon serves as a case study in how extraordinary claims propagate and persist in modern society. Looking at the current state of UFO research and government disclosure, it's clear that we're living through a remarkable period of change. Military and intelligence officials are now openly discussing encounters with objects that display advanced technology beyond current human capabilities. Scientists are seriously studying the physics of anomalous aerial phenomena. Congressional committees are demanding answers about decades of secrecy and cover-ups. In this new environment, Bob Lazar's claims don't seem quite as outlandish as they did in 1989. The idea that government agencies might possess advanced technology that they're studying in secret facilities no longer sounds impossible. The notion that this technology might be far ahead of publicly acknowledged science seems increasingly plausible. But we still need to be careful about drawing conclusions without solid evidence. The fact that some UFO encounters appear to be real doesn't automatically validate every claim about reverse engineering programs or alien technology. The fact that element 115 was eventually discovered doesn't prove that a stable isotope with anti-gravity properties actually exists or that Bob Lazar ever worked with such materials. What the Bob Lazar story teaches us is the importance of keeping an open mind while maintaining rigorous standards of evidence. We should be willing to consider extraordinary possibilities, but we should demand extraordinary proof before accepting them as fact. We should be skeptical of official denials and cover-up claims, but equally skeptical of sensational allegations that can't be independently verified. The truth about Bob Lazar and his claims may never be fully known, but his story has served an important purpose in pushing the boundaries of acceptable public discourse about UFOs and government secrecy. He's helped create space for serious scientific and political discussion of topics that were once considered completely off-limits. As we move forward into an era of greater transparency about unidentified aerial phenomena, we'll need to apply the lessons learned from cases like Bob Lazar's. We'll need to evaluate new claims and evidence with both appropriate skepticism and genuine openness to paradigm-shifting discoveries. We'll need to separate credible whistleblowers from attention seekers and hoaxers. Most importantly, we'll need to insist on transparency and accountability from institutions that have historically operated in excessive secrecy. The Bob Lazar phenomenon reminds us that the search for truth about UFOs and potential non-human intelligence is far from over. Whether his specific claims are accurate or not, his willingness to come forward has contributed to a larger movement toward disclosure and transparency. His story continues to inspire researchers, investigators, and ordinary citizens who believe that the public has a right to know what their government knows about these extraordinary phenomena. In the end, The most important legacy of Bob Lazar may not be the specific details of his claims about Element 115 and reverse-engineered spacecraft. Instead, it may be his demonstration that individuals can challenge powerful institutions and force important conversations that those institutions would prefer to avoid. In an age when government secrecy and corporate power often seem overwhelming, the Bob Lazar story reminds us that ordinary people can still make a difference by speaking truth to power, even when that truth seems impossible to believe. What do you think about Bob Lazar's extraordinary claims? Are we looking at the testimony of the most important whistleblower in human history, or something else entirely? The evidence remains incomplete, the questions unanswered, and the mystery deeper than ever. But one thing is certain. The conversation Bob Lazar started in 1989 is far from over, and the implications of that conversation could change everything we think we know about our place in the universe. If this deep dive into one of the most controversial figures in UFO history has opened your mind to new possibilities, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with anyone who's ready to question everything they think they know about reality. Subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell, because we're just getting started exploring the mysteries that challenge our understanding of science, government, and the cosmos itself. The truth is out there, and together we're going to find it.